Today we have the great pleasure of welcoming Vicente Hurtado, who is the head of Energy Taxation and Other Indirect Taxes Unit in the European Commission. Vicente will provide us with a presentation explaining the fundamentals of the policy, after which we will have a panel discussion. We've amassed a panel of experts from industry, academia and policy areas in order to discuss the significance of this policy in terms of Australian trade. Assisting me in the progress of today's presentation, we have Marian Schoen, who is the National Director for the European Australian Climate Business Network, Jason Collins, the CEO of the European Australian Business Council, and myself. Finally, proceedings will be wrapped up by the CEO of Professionals in International Trade, Alexander Cohen. Without any more ado, I'd like to hand over to Marian, who will introduce our speaker in greater length.
Thank you, Bill. I'd also like to extend a warm welcome to everyone joining us this evening. We're delighted to be co-presenting this webinar with the Professionals in Trade and the European Australian Business Council to share Australian and European policy and practice to build momentum in the transition to a net zero economy. As context for the carbon border mechanism, on which we'll shortly hear more detail, I'd like to mention some of the wider actions that are part of the EU's overarching ambition in the European Green Deal to become climate neutral by 2050 and to reduce carbon emissions by at least 55% by 2030. Europe's action plan for the transition to a resource efficient and competitive economy, the Green Deal aims to decouple growth from resource use by moving to a clean and circular economy while ensuring a just and inclusive transition. A comprehensive and interconnected set of domestic policies and initiatives flow from the Green Deal to set this foundation for a green and digital economy, with several major proposals released by the European Commission yesterday to accelerate emissions reductions over the next critical decade. These include carbon pricing through the emissions trading scheme, which has now been extended to transport, buildings and shipping, and a carbon levy on imports to commence in 2026. Increased emissions targets have been set for member states for agriculture and waste, and a target of 40% for renewable energy. Other measures include greater adoption of biodiversity practices to build resilient forest ecosystems, and increased targets for energy efficiency and building renovations, and stronger emissions performance standards for cars, with all new cars to be net zero by 2035. While being pursued within the EU's borders, the Green Deal also has strong external implications, not only because of the EU's own ecological footprint in other parts of the world, but because strategies for biodiversity, energy, blue economy, and others have global elements. Restructuring and transferring the EU's economy will directly affect the EU's trade regulations and standards, and therefore consumption and production patterns across global value chains. The EU needs to secure access to raw materials, technologies, and resilient supply chains for its critical industries to strengthen the resilience and competitiveness of its own economy. This external dimension to achieve climate neutrality within the EU requires coupling of internal policy with external action and using its market and regulatory powers to transform itself and others. Sustainability is now a central pillar of EU trade policy, with trade agreements the means to increase the climate ambition of trading partners and engage them on elements of the Green Deal. In particular, two policy areas demonstrate the impact of this sustainability agenda on global industry and trade. This is the EU's new circular economy plan, which aims to prevent waste and ensure resources are retained for as long as possible within the EU. These efforts to accelerate the circular transition will, however, lead to shifts in volume and the composition of international material flows and impact trade. For trade policy to advance the circular agenda, it needs to be mutually supportive of such domestic initiatives to avoid creating trade barriers or constraining the adoption of circular and resource efficiency policies. Another area in which the EU extends its external climate action is the mobilisation of international climate finance and the drive to finance and investment through the International Platform for Sustainable Finance. The EU Sustainable Finance Framework includes prudential regulations and a taxonomy of classifications of activities contributing to environmental objectives, which now form the basis on which EU companies and financial institutions must report and disclose to investors and consumers. Companies established or doing business in the EU are now also required to report on supply chain due diligence related to human rights and environmental impacts such as deforestation, both upstream and downstream in their supply chains. So with that brief overview of the ways in which the EU is shaping global rules and climate ambition, I'd like to introduce our speaker. Vicente Hurtado is head of the Energy Taxation and Indirect Taxes Unit at the Directorate General for Tax at the European Commission. His deep experience at the Commission includes several years in the Secretariat General to the Commission President, which coordinates policy across the Commission and is the interface with other institutions such as the European Council, before moving to the Directorate General for Taxation in 2006. Prior to joining the European Commission, Vicente worked for over 10 years in international taxation at the international Spanish law firm Garrigues. With that, I'll hand over to Jason for his remarks on the implications of the EU's climate and trade agenda for Australian industry.
Well, thank you very much, Marian. Thank you, Bill, and delighted to be joining this session this afternoon on behalf of the European Australian Business Council. And I'll only speak briefly as, of course, we're here to hear Vicente's presentation and indeed the really quite momentous announcements that have been made. The package, the Fit for 55 package that's been delivered, as Marian said, just less than 24 hours ago. Where this fits is that it's vitally important that as Australia and the European Union try to draw much closer together, not only in terms of commercial dealings, but also in the range of public policy challenges that both economies face. And we seek to build the most common framework, if you like, for addressing some of those challenges into the future, whether they be cybersecurity, for example, just to name one. The rules of the game, certainly in trade, very critical, but many other areas as well. It was 50 or so years ago where the Australian economy had a very strong trading relationship that was centred around historical legacy relationships. The UK in particular was key to that. And then, of course, the UK moved into the then economic community, and Australia had to look at ways to diversify. Although Australia had signed a fairly groundbreaking agreement with Japan in 1957, this was a forerunner of the intensification of Australia's trade and investment relationships with countries in the Asia-Pacific region, which have certainly intensified over the last 30 to 40 years. However, the relationship with Europe has remained strong throughout as well. And notwithstanding that opportunity which presents Australia in terms of the Asia-Pacific region or the Indo-Pacific region and all of the growth or the driver of global growth as we see it now, the relationship with Europe is one that will continue to grow and prosper and ought to continue to grow and prosper. And so we have been delighted, I think us and so many other interests around the virtual room today, that an agenda for a comprehensive economic partnership, a free trade agreement, is well on the way into negotiation. And both sides have high ambition in terms of concluding that agreement later this year. Unlike agreements which focused on the sort of transactional nature of trade, this agreement is one that we hope will go so much further in terms of digital economy, in terms of standards, in terms of recognition of qualifications and a whole range of areas which previously were not part of free trade agreements. Because, as I say, we're looking for something that binds the parties together in ways that go beyond simple transactional arrangements. So how Australia and Europe confront the challenges of climate mitigation, of sustainable development, of transition of our economies to low emissions low emissions economies is certainly one that's very much in focus and part of the environment in which this free trade agreement is being negotiated. So we're all very keen to understand better the direction of this agenda. We know that it's it hasn't been a simple process to now, but it certainly will continue to be a complicated and complex set of negotiations that will happen within Europe and with its external partners as the package comes into its final form and then into the implementation phase. So we greatly appreciate the opportunity to have this discussion with the European Commission today. And I look forward to bringing in other voices to contribute to the discussion after the main presentation. But for now, Vicente, we look forward to your presentation. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Marian. Thank you, Bill. And good morning from Brussels, and maybe a bit later in Australia. As Bill said at the beginning, the package has been adopted in possibly less than 24 hours ago. So it's really very, very fresh, coming, I would say, coming hot from the oven. So we're still reading the first reactions to the package. Okay, the package was already known. Most of the features of the package were known, and so the public opinion, journalists, and also reactions from third countries were arriving. So we already had an idea. But I think now we have all the definitive elements on the table. So now it's the moment really to talk, to discuss, and of course to engage, and in this case to engage with third countries, because the CBAM of course has a very international dimension, and it's very important for us to reach out to countries around the world. The package, which was adopted yesterday, as I said, less than 24 hours ago, has a very trendy, strange name, Fit for 55. We have received a lot of jokes. Is it a dating app? Is it the name of a new gym for middle-aged adults? Nothing to do with that. 55, as you know, is the emission reductions target in the EU for 2030. And what we want to do with this package, of this bundle of 12 proposals, is to make sure that the EU is on track in order to achieve this target, and even beyond, because as you know, the Commission, the European Union, in its climate law has already adopted a target of carbon neutrality by 2050, as many countries also around the world, and I think that's the very good news. As part of this package, there are two proposals for which I'm responsible. One is the Energy Taxation Directive. It's not a new one, of course, it's been there for a long time, but it's a very, very old one. And we want, of course, to update the rules to make sure that taxation is also coherent with the climate and environmental objectives of the European Union. And for example, we are considering the taxation of the aviation and the maritime sectors, which is maybe one of the flagships initiatives in the package. Of course, the revision of the emission trading system, Marian referred to the whole package in detail, so I'm not going to spend much time on that, but I think it's important to understand that the Commission is putting on the table a very ambitious revised emission trading system, which has been working for some years quite successfully. And now we are proposing also to extend it to other sectors, or to the main sectors which were not covered by the emission trading system, like, for example, maritime and road transport and buildings. But all these, of course, needs to be accompanied by an external dimension. I mean, we can't forget that we live in a world world. Pollution, environment are a global concern as well, and therefore the efforts of the European Union would be completely watered down, or could be completely offset, and this is what we normally call the risk of carbon leakage, if the efforts in the EU are not accompanied or are completely offset by production outside the European Union. So this is why we think that the introduction of a carbon border adjustment mechanism will make sure that we will. Sorry. Could we come to the first slide, because maybe it would be easier for the audience to the objectives. Sorry, the second slide. So as I was saying, I mean, the efforts in the European Union need to be accompanied also by external dimension. I hope I will be able to convince you today that the measure is not protectionist, has nothing to do with competitiveness, The measure has to do with the fact or the idea that all countries around the world have to do their efforts in order to decarbonize and to make sure that we will reach our ambitious targets in 2050 or by 2050. So this is why a carbon border adjustment mechanism should be seen as a complementary measure, which in the end intends to make sure that goods that come to the European Union play the same rules as the goods that have produced in the European Union. So if we have an emission trading system, which is our harmonized carbon pricing in the European Union, we make sure that the goods put on sale in the European Union, whether they are produced in the European Union, whether they have been produced in a third country, they have a common responsibility, they share a common responsibility, and therefore they ensure that they have paid a carbon price. I know that, or I want to notice that it has been announced also as a new own resource of the European Union. But that has not to be misleading us to understand or to think that we introduce this message in order to collect revenues. I can tell you that our first assessment calculations of the revenues of the measure are really very low. Actually, since the measure will be accompanied by a reduction of also the free allowances in the emission trading system in the European Union for EU producers, most of the revenues will come from the auctioning of the ETS allowances. So the measure as such will not be a main source of resources, but of course, the emission trading system, which will become also at the same time a new own resource or partially a new own resource, will of course provide the revenues to decarbonize the EU, but also to invest in third countries in order to help, in particular, the less developed countries and those who are more in a need to go for decarbonization. So one of the main objectives, of course, is to prevent this carbon leakage, as I explained before, so that our efforts are not completely watered down or are not offset by third countries which continue to pollute and which do not engage with the ambitions of the Paris Agreement in even further. But also we have maybe, I don't want to be naive, but maybe we also want to encourage and to engage with third countries in order to make sure that they also change their behaviors. They also introduce credible and effective systems in order to decarbonize, carbon pricing systems. We are not imposing any in particular. As I said, we have the emission trading system in the EU, but there might be others, like, for example, a carbon tax. So any country can decide how they want to do that. And we know that the US, for example, they are pushing or they are betting on other regulatory measures. But the idea is, of course, that the rest of the world will also increase their level of ambition, will reduce emissions in the coming years, and therefore we will reach a global objective, which is to decarbonize at the EU level. I think that the changes are good. We can see that since we started talking about this carbon border adjustment back in the summer of 2019, when President von der Leyen took office. There have been movements, there have been announcements among countries. I can understand that there was some reluctance at the beginning, some hesitations about the measure. Could be competitiveness, could be a customs duty, a new green customs duty, could be a trade measure to stop trade. I mean, that's very far away. When you will get to know the details of the measure, you will see that that's quite far away from that. So moving to the next slide, maybe we can concentrate on the key elements of the design. The measure is complex. I'm not going to hide that. We have tried to mirror our emission trading system, what makes the measure a bit complex. But I think that the good news is that we will come with a simplified procedure in the first 3 years of application, hopefully from 2023. So that means that the measure as such will not be applicable or will not deploy all the effects until 26. So that will give us time to understand the system, to team up with the European Union with this system. I can tell you that, for example, the Canadians are very much interested. The Americans want to know, want to understand. And we are in contact with many other countries like Korea, Japan, who are listening to us. And I hope, why not, Jason, you referred to the fostering of the importance of the EU-Australian relationship, which is growing and becoming more and more robust. Why not also in the area of carbon pricing and in the area of CBAM? I'm very hopeful that Australia will be one of the good allies of the European Union, and that's something which is important. So we mirror the EU ETS in the way we introduce the measure. We have to comply with WTO regulations, of course. That's for us a bottom line and a red line. I mean, whatever we have put on the table, whatever we have designed, be reassured that is compatible with WTO rules. I can tell you that my colleagues in DG Trade and Executive Vice President Dombrovskis have been very careful about that to make sure that the measure is fully compatible and, of course, will respect all the provisions or the provisions in the GATT. But not only that, I mean, we also have other international engagements like the Paris Agreement. We also have free trade agreements. You mentioned other agreements like the one with discussions with Australia, and of course we have also a customs union with Turkey, and of course special relationships with our neighboring countries. So for us, it's very important, of course, that the measure completely fits into the context of all these agreements and that respects all these agreements. We will focus, of course, on the sectors which are most at risk of carbon leakage, and therefore, of course, those sectors which are carbon intensive and where, of course, there is a sufficient trade. Otherwise, the measure would not make any sense. So these are more or less the key elements of the design. Maybe coming into a bit more details with the basic concepts on the next slide. The idea is that from 26 importers, and the burden will fall on the importers, and something similar to what we have for example, for the management of the customs duties. I work in TaxUD, which is responsible for taxation, but we are also responsible of the customs arrangements. So we want to put in practice something which is not completely new, in the sense that we want to build on what is existing practice, and therefore we rely also on how customs work, because customs are the first the frontliners when it comes to the importation of goods. So the idea is that we will introduce an ETS, a sort of ETS market for imports from third countries, which will run in parallel to the EU ETS. We were discussing whether you should be, or imports from third countries should be introduced into the EU ETS. We came to the conclusion that was going to be difficult. If you know how the ETS works, it's a cap and trade system. We set the emissions, so we cap the emissions, and then there is a market that sets the price for carbon. So it would be difficult to set the emissions globally, because that would have also another aspect, which would be some sort of restricting importation for the countries. And as I said before, that's far away from our idea. We don't want, of course, to restrict trade. This is not a trade measure. This is, of course, an environmental measure. So we thought that the best would be to have a parallel market running only for country importations into the EU. Importers will be obliged to register, okay, in order to have some sort of identification, but that's general practice. And then, of course, they will be responsible of buying those ETS certificates or CBAM certificates when it comes to importations of goods on a yearly basis. So we will have a system which is very similar to the ETS, and then those certificates will be surrendered in the year after. Well, there will be some sort of 5 months in order to surrender, according to the emissions embedded in the goods imported into the EU. And also we will take into account the carbon price paid at the source. We have received a lot of questions about that. Okay, so that means that there might be overlaps, because if my country makes an effort and introduce an ETS with a carbon price or has a carbon tax in place, we will be paying in country of origin, then we will be penalized again by importing or exporting into the EU. No, that's not the idea, of course. What we want to make sure is that there is a carbon price. if you pay a carbon price which is equivalent, for example, to the European, which is the same as the European Union, then you don't pay any CBAM. If you don't emit emissions in the production of your goods, you don't have to pay a CBAM as well. So as you can see, we try to be respectful of the measures in the countries. We try to be, of course, to take into account as much as possible the measures around the world. So we want to be inclusive. We don't want to penalize. What we want to make sure is that as the EU producers pay a carbon price and reduce their emissions, the third country producers will do the same. So as you know, I mentioned before, there in the EU ETS, we have currently a measure to deal with the carbon leakage, which has been quite successful, I have to say, which is the free allowances. But the free allowances will have to go. I mean, that's clear. As we reach our level of ambition and the free allowances are reducing, there's already a linear factor reduction in the number of the allowances. It will be reviewed by 2025 for all EU industry. So as these go down, these will be phased out. Also, the CBAM will be phased in. We know, as I said, we don't want to impose a higher burden on imports from the countries than on the EU. So we will acknowledge the existence of free allowances or some of the free allowances still in the system for those goods, and therefore importers will also benefit from that level of free allowances. But as I said before, the idea is a sort of gradual phase in, phase out from 2026. So there will be an accelerated reduction of free allowances for the sectors covering the CBAM in the EU, at the same time as we will gradually introduce the CBAM. And when I say gradually, it means that we will take into account, of course, again, the free allowances in the system also for imports from third countries. So that in a nutshell, and sorry if I rushed a bit, I come from Spain, so we speak very, very fast, but I'm sure that through the questions afterwards, I will be able to explain better how the system will work. In any case, as I said before, we have some time to explain better, to understand, to try to put it into place. Yeah, coming next to the next slide, maybe you are eager to know what are the sectors that will be concerned. We decided from the beginning to concentrate first on a small number of sectors. Well, it's a small number, but they already cover 45% of the CO2 emissions. So it's a large representation of the emissions, or the most emitters in the European Union and also around the world. So the sectors that will be covered in the first stage are cement, iron, steel, aluminium, fertilizers, also electricity. Electricity has been requested by some of the peripheral member states in the EU because they are increasing more and more the imports or the dependency on electricity from the countries. And as they are decarbonizing, they are closing their coal power stations. They want to make sure that we don't change power stations in the EU with imports of coal or electricity produced from coal from their neighboring countries. So the idea is to concentrate first on those sectors, or rather than on the sectors, on some goods from those sectors. You will see on the annex to the proposal what these goods are. These are basic materials. There was a lot of discussion in the preparation about extension to other sectors, and of course to the downstream sectors. Okay, we introduced the measure on steel, perfect. But what happens with goods which are very intensive on steel, like for example the production of cars or the production of planes or other products? We look at that. We understand that as the measure is being gradually introduced, the impact, or at least at the beginning, the impact will be very low on those products. But of course, there is the possibility. That's something that we want to review. There will be already a review of the measure in 2025. So even before we start applying the measure, we will have a sort of review, and we will decide whether we extend to other sectors and to other products. I was not very precise before about, for example, which emissions are covered. We had a lot of discussions about direct and indirect emissions. As you know, indirect emissions are the ones which come from electricity, which is used for the production of the goods. Aluminium is a very good example, which is a very a very intensive product, a product or a good which is very intensive on electricity and therefore on indirect emissions. At the beginning, we will start with direct emissions in 2026, but we will analyze from now until 2025 whether we should also extend to indirect emissions and how to do that. There are issues with the methodology, so that's something where we will need some time to think about that. So reflections, of course, from now until 2025. This is only the beginning. I mean, the announcement of the adoption by the Commission, of course, of the measure, it's only the beginning. Now we will move to the discussions in the Council, to discussions with the Parliament. If you know a bit about the interinstitutional procedures in or framework in the European Union, this is how it works. And then, of course, we will, of course, think about the implementation of the measure in order to be able to do a good implementation from 2026. On the next slide, I explain better the gradual phase in. So some sort of transitional phase from 2023 to 2025, where the system will not be running fully. Let's call it like that. There won't be any recollection or collection of revenues. That will be what we call a sort of dry run process, where we will have some sort of reporting system in place by which we will collect information from the importers. The customs will do that. They will get information from the goods imported into the EU in terms of emissions, direct and indirect, because we want to collect that information. And also we will analyze the impact. We would like to know also you have a carbon pricing measure in place, how much you pay, if you have an ETS or you have a carbon price, sorry, a carbon tax. So that's the type of information that we want, of course, to collect during that period. And then from 2026, we will have this, what we call here on the slide, the post-transitional phase, which is the full application of the CBAM, and which is more or less what I explained before in terms of CBAM certificates, taking into account, of course, actual emissions and the possibility also to claim for some sort of reimbursement of the carbon price paid at origin. So gradual phase-in, plenty of time in order to adapt, to understand, and why not to team up with the European Union with CBAM. On the next slide, the main obligations that will be in place from 2026. I already referred to some of them. The previous one, sorry. Previous slide. No, previous. Oh, okay, that one. So very, very quickly, registration obligations, declaration of the goods, of course, purchasing of the CBAM certificates. I didn't mention that before, but as we want to mirror the ETS as much as possible, the certificates will be put on sale at weekly prices. So something very, very similar to what we have in the EU. We have some sort of auctioning which takes place every week. We have 3 different platforms. Sometimes we have 2 auctionings per week. Okay, we wanted to simplify. We will publish the price or the average price of those auctioning platforms by the end of every week, and that will be the reference price for the week after. So producers will be able to choose whether they want to buy now, they want to buy later, a bit like in the European Union, so that, okay, you know, the price will be, of course, evolving, rising. We expect it to rise as the ambition will also rise. So there will be some flexibility also for importers to decide how many certificates they want to buy in the system and by when. And then there will be some sort of, or there will be a surrendering of these certificates at the end of the year, by May of the year after of the period of reference. And what we want to put also is some sort of limitations to the number, but I mean, you will discover the details when you go through the regulation. The idea, of course, is to avoid some sort of speculation. I think it's good for all of us, not only for us, for the credibility of the system, but also for you, in order to avoid that some smart guys try to stockpile certificates at a very low price, and then they try to use them 3-4 years after, because that can put also some pressure on the system. And then, of course, if some of these certificates have not been used, we will be able to, or importers will be able, of course, to return these unused certificates to us. I'm not going to go more into the details at EU level, the role of the customs in the EU, the role of the national climate authorities in member states. I think that that's maybe relevant for you. That's very important, of course, for our EU partners or for our EU member states. We are going to engage with them and to start already discussions at the very beginning of September, after the summer break in Europe in August, which is the classical month for the holidays. We will start already discussing on the 2nd of September with member states, and from tomorrow, I'm already going to the parliament tomorrow. We are going to, of course, start discussing the details and the implementation of the measures. Now, very quickly to last slides, one on the international dimension. As I said before, we are respectful of WTO engagements. We are already reaching out to the WTO committees in order to discuss this. We want to be more active from September, and we are organizing with our external action service, with the EEAS, and also with our colleagues in DG Trade, who are responsible, of course, of discussions in Geneva. We are already planning how to reach out to the authorities in third countries to explain the measure, and also to finalize, why not, to find points of contact where we can have, where we can share our mind. We want to have extensive discussions in the G20 or in the margins of the G20 in Venice last week. We already did that, but we, of course, will continue discussing with all countries. Maybe this is also a call for the Australian authorities, if they're listening to me today, to be also active with us, to call us, to engage at all levels, at technical level with us, with my team, but also, of course, at the level of the Commission, with the President, with Vice President Timmermans, and with my Commissioner Gentiloni, in order to get to know the measure, in order to see how we can cooperate also together. The communique of the G20 finance ministers last week was very clear. We should include a wide set of tools in order to price carbon. Of course, that's up to members how they want, to third countries, to countries to decide how they want to do that. The EU is ready to explain the ETS, it's ready to explain its measures. And I'm very happy and proud to see that some countries are already doing that. But of course, every country will know how to best do these things. CBAM has been designed mirroring the EU ETS, but why not? CBAM measures can be replicated in other countries. As I said before, Canada is very interested. The CBAM in the EU is not the first one. California and also Quebec have something in place, only for electricity generation, but they already have something in place since some time ago. And I think that other possibilities are coming to the light. And maybe a last slide, because some people in the audience will be wondering, okay, yeah, we saw the sectors. Do you think Australia will be impacted? Okay, well, in principle, as you can see on the slide, if we talk about cement, fertilizers, iron, steel, aluminium, Australia doesn't seem to be one of the big importers or exporters into the EU. So in principle, you should not be concerned much with the introduction of the CBAM, at least as it has been designed at this moment. But as I said before, there will be a review by 2025, and we could extend also to other sectors. But for the moment, as you can see on the slide, the countries that will be mainly concerned are, of course, Turkey, Ukraine, Russia, China, Norway. I have to say that countries like, for example, Norway, Iceland, Switzerland will be exempted because they have an ETS in place. Well, Norway has the EU ETS in place, so it doesn't make any sense that we apply the measure to Norway. But in principle, yeah, these are the countries that will be impacted. In terms of the electricity, our main connections now are with, of course, the neighboring countries, like, for example, Morocco, also the Balkans, Ukraine, Belarus, Russia. So these are the main, of course, partners when it comes to electricity. And with that, I would like to finalize my presentation. Sorry if I rushed, but I think I tried to condense in few minutes the main features of the measure. I hope I convey to you the main objectives with the measure, which for me, for us, of course, is the most important. You don't need to fear the introduction of a CBAM. I hope you will find, you will be able to discover the beauty of the measure and the possibilities also for Australia to engage in terms of CBAM, in terms of carbon pricing in your country and in international, of course, fora, in order to promote the decarbonization around the world. And why not? Maybe you will be considering also a CBAM in the coming years. Okay, thank you very much for the opportunity for reaching out to you. I mean, and now I'm open if you want to take some of the questions and to clarify or to expand the explanation.